It's in Manchester Street in Derby. I miss it, but in hindsight, I don't miss the feelings of being quite ever alone in the house. From this experience, I really believe that our ties to our family never really leave us, even after we have left this earth, which is rather nice, actually, after what we've just done with Andrea earlier in the pub. One gloomy day in November in 2006, I was about to go on my lunch break and thought that I'd walk around the area and have a look at the surrounding streets to see what houses were for sale. I was looking to buy my first house, newly single and turning 30. I was looking for somewhere central in town that I could call my own, not far from the office I was working in at the time. I didn't drive, so I needed to be very central. It started to drizzle, so I thought I'd just walk down a couple of side streets and then head back to the office. I turned off the main road and walked down a terraced street with most properties rented to students. I thought this isn't really the area that I would want to look at purchasing a house, but I felt a vague familiarity as I passed the derelict mill at the end of the road. And I was intrigued as I had never been here before, yet I had a strange feeling that there was a cobbled area with outbuildings further up the street, just between the terraced houses. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to carry on up the street just to see if I was right. And then I'd head back to the office and Google the area and see what was for sale in the locality. As I walked, the drizzle became rain, just as I came upon an outbuilding set back from the road in a cobbled area. How odd, I thought. That's what I thought I'd find here. Suddenly, I became aware of a man in overalls, a cap and a dark-coloured jacket with patches on the elbows, leaning on the corner between a wooden door to a car restoration workshop and the wall of a terraced house. He was covered in grease and smoking a very strong cigarette. Interestingly, thinking back, it was the cigarette that I smelled first before I even saw him. He made me feel a little uneasy as he looked at me and said, "How do, Doc?" Nevertheless, I said that I wasn't expecting the rain and that I was just exploring the area as I was looking to buy a house, but that I'd better get back to work now. I turned to walk back when he lurched forward, making me feel a bit jumpy, then slowly tapped the wall of the terraced house with his hand, holding the cigarette, and said, tipping his head to one side, "You should buy this one, my duck, it's for sale." I thanked him and made my excuses and walked rather quickly up the street, not wanting to look back, but feeling like he was watching me leave. Back in the warm and dry, I ate my lunch, tried to slug off the strange feeling, the uneasy feeling, and scolding myself at how daft I was wandering around an area I didn't know on my own. Later on the bus home, I couldn't stop thinking about the street and why did it feel so familiar. I googled the area and found that the mill and the surrounding streets belonged to a brewery in the late 1890s. The house by the outbuildings was indeed for sale, and had been for such a long time, although there was no sign up, and it was well below my price range, and it really did need a lot of work, but strangely it had a strange pull about it that made me more interested. I went to bed that evening and it was all I could think about. My dreams flitted from the familiarity of the mill and the street I had never been to before, then back to the house. But always the man in the jacket was just there in the background. Having not slept very well during that night, the next morning I took the bus to work and stopped in the estate agents that I'd googled the day before to ask about that property. They were surprised and said, well, they could show me around that lunchtime. I met the estate agent, a smart chap with a clipboard, younger than me, who introduced himself and opened the door to the property. And he said quite cheerily, I'll wait here. You have a good look round, won't you? I thought this was a bit strange and walked into the front room. It was like going back in time. Gorgeous fireplaces, original wooden floor to ceiling cupboards, pine doors. As I walked into the huge middle room and opened the shutters on the window, I smelt a particular damp smell, peppered with thick cigarette smoke. Despite this, I was in love with this house. The stairs had a strange feeling about them, but I soon forgot about this when I saw the original Victorian fuse box at the top of the stairs. This house was perfect for me. I stood looking out of the window at the estate agent on the pavement below, wondering what would be a sensible offer, and should I wait until I'm back at work to put the offer in. I saw a few students walking up the street with pizzas from the pizza place on the main road. That's handy, I thought. And there was the man in the jacket, perhaps on his lunch break, cigarette in his mouth, standing across the road from the estate agent, arms behind his back, leaning against the front of the house across the road. Neither had seemed to acknowledge each other, but he looked up at my window. I waved. I'm not sure if he saw me or not. I thought that I must thank him for telling me about this house. It's like I was meant to live here. I just loved it. My offer was accepted. My family thought I was mad, and there was so much work to do on the property. New heating system, new electrics, damp proofing, lead water pipes removed. But undeterred, I moved in during the February, and work commenced on modernising the place without removing the original features. The house did feel very odd at times. I had an electrician and a plasterer who both left halfway through their jobs and never returned for their payment. They wouldn't even return my calls. A plumber mentioned that the house had a strange feeling and he didn't like being on his own in there. Just as well as he did some work while I wasn't in, and I thought he must have chain smoked the entire time he was there. The house smelt so strongly of cigarettes, but I always felt like I was meant to be there. My cat would jump at odd times and stare at the stairs. I took on lodgers to help pay the mortgage, and they never stayed too long, citing that they felt uncomfortable living there. But I belonged there. I was home. After about a year, I started dating someone who would eventually become my husband. One evening, he was staying over and said he would start cooking tea. That's a Marks and Spencer's dinner for £10, while I had a shower. He was in the kitchen that I had converted the outside toilet and coal shed for more space. He suddenly felt uneasy. As he turned, he saw what he reported to the police: a man with dark hair in a jacket with patches on the elbows enter the middle room through the original outside door. My boyfriend shouted, and as he followed the man upstairs, turned and smiled at me. I'll do that bit again. Very difficult, you know. My boyfriend shouted, and as he followed the man upstairs, it's still bloody wrong. So it's been, I don't know who edited this, but it's totally. My boyfriend shouted, and as he followed, the man walked up the stairs, turned, and smiled at my boyfriend. He had grease on his face and a cigarette in his mouth. My boyfriend ran up the stairs, fearing something would happen to me in the shower. I heard my boyfriend scramble on the landing. The smell of cigarette smoke filled the air and set the newly installed smoke alarm off. What the bloody hell has happened? I said, dripping wet on the landing. My boyfriend was already telling the police operator that we'd been broken into, and the man was still in the house. I grabbed my clothes. The police arrived and searched everywhere, including the attic and the cellar, to see if he could have left the house any other way. The police said he must be hiding somewhere, and they searched the house thoroughly. No one was found. We were advised to stay somewhere else that evening. We went to my boyfriend's house, and my boyfriend refused to stay at my house ever again. In time, I fell pregnant, and we moved into my boyfriend's house permanently. I tried to rent my property, but no one would stay there more than a few months. I loved that house. It was strangely part of me. But with a small child, one on the way, a wedding to plan, and another mortgage, I knew I just couldn't keep it. We prepared the house for sale, but hadn't instructed an estate agent yet. The time just didn't feel right. I had now owned that house for 12 years. It had been empty for 3 years, but I just could not bring myself to list it with an agent. One summer day, I went to cut the grass. My husband came to pick me up, but before leaving, I sat on the stairs. I cried, and I said out loud how sad I was to leave, but how happy I was to have been part of the house and its history. I thought to myself, how thin these walls must be, and how much the students next door must smoke as it comes through the bricks. The smell was very strong in the middle room that day, but I was pregnant with my second child, and I seemed very sensitive to smells, having a bad case of morning sickness. I got everything together, wiped my eyes, and locked the front door. As I stepped back into the pavement, I walked into a man in his 30s. I apologised for treading on him. He smiled and said he was looking to buy a house in the area, and he had been talking to a man at the outbuildings next door, and he said, "You will be selling the house soon." I smiled, unlocked the door and said, "Have a look round. If you want, I'll wait here." He did. My husband and little boy watching from the car thought I was bonkers, but I gave him my phone number and he walked off up the street. I got in my husband's car and I pulled off. I saw the man in the jacket smoking a cigarette by the side of the house. He is always watching, I thought. I waved, he smiled. Later that day, I sold my house to the man I stood on. It felt just right. He made an offer and I accepted. Everything went through the solicitors, and when the day came to hand over the keys, I had just commenced maternity leave and my second baby, so we decided to take my 98-year-old grandfather out for lunch, as myself and my husband were both off work. We arranged to meet the new owner at the house at midday en route to the restaurant, having picked up my grandfather. He had never seen my first house, so I thought it would be nice to show him exactly where I lived before I sold it completely. The new owner was waiting excitedly outside the house. We pulled up and parked at the outbuildings. I left my grandfather in the car with my children and husband and handed over the keys by the front door. I wished him well, and he said that he thought the house had chosen him, as he wasn't really looking in this area, but this house was wonderful. I joked, that's exactly how I felt. We must be related. We laughed. I got back into the car and took one last look at my first home, tinged with happy sadness. When I first saw the house, I was single and carefree. Now I was married, a mother of 2 boys, caring for my elderly grandfather. How things change and move on. But I was so happy that the person who bought it was so much like me. Are you ready for this? My grandfather spoke and visibly jolted me from my thoughts. God, he says, it's years since I've been on this street. Your great uncle was given a house with his job at the mill here. I remember going on my dad's crossbar, cycling from Chaddesden to see him. He'd be leaning against the wall, smoking a fag, watching the world go by. Filthy he'd be, grease all over his face and his patched jacket and cap. Never took 'em off, always having a smoke. My husband went pale. I looked round at the house, the outbuildings and the mill, now converted into luxury apartments, and they slowly disappeared from view. He'd have liked you all, my grandfather said. I replied, how strange, Grandad, that I would end up on that same street. I wish I'd met him. I think I'd have liked him too. We carried on to the restaurant and have never spoken about it since. I still miss my first house. We've moved to a 1930s house now, but sometimes in a fleeting moment we think we can smell a familiar smell and we smile at each other. From Amy Garrett. Wow. I don't know. It's not a bad story, is it? You're all asleep, obviously.